Hello there, welcome to HFY Quantum Pro. Here, helping one another makes the universe smarter. So, what we are waiting for? Let's begin our story.
The egg was the size of a refrigerator, and it was dying. Cale Maddox knew this because the thermal scanner in his hand was flashing red, and because the alien veterinarian standing next to him had been weeping for the last 20 minutes straight. Not quiet, dignified tears either. Full body shaking, mucus dripping, wailing sobs that made the translator earpiece screech with static every few seconds. It cannot survive, Dr. Vathis said between gasps. Her four arms hung limp at her sides, and her gray skin had gone almost white. The mother is dead. The incubation chamber is destroyed. The temperature is dropping, and there is nothing in this galaxy that can replace a Korvathi nest. Kale looked at the egg again. It sat in the middle of what had once been a beautiful breeding facility on the planet Dretian. Now was rubble. A pirate raid had torn through the station 6 hours ago, killing everything that moved and blowing up everything that didn't. The Galactic Union Patrol had arrived too late to save anyone, but just in time to find the egg still intact among the wreckage. Point one egg. The last Korvathi egg in existence. The Korvathi were a reptilian species, somewhere between a dragon and a six-legged crocodile, and they had been hunted to near extinction over the last century for their scales, which certain wealthy species used as currency. This egg represented the entire future of their kind, and it was cooling down fast. What temperature does it need? Kale asked the doctor. Vatha blinked all six of her eyes at him. What? The egg. What temperature does it need to stay alive? Between 42 and 45 degrees Celsius, held constant for the remaining 19 days of incubation. But that is not the only problem. It needs vibration, low-frequency hums. The mother would sing to the egg for hours each day. Without it, the embryo's neural pathways will not form correctly. And it needs contact, physical, living contact. Machines have been tried before. They do not work. The embryo can tell the difference. Kale put down the scanner. He pulled off his jacket. Then he pulled off his shirt. What are you doing? Dr. Vatha asked. Humans run at about 37 degrees, Kale said. But I can push that up if I work at it. Fever response. Controlled stress on the body raises core temperature. It won't be perfect, but it'll be close. You cannot be serious. You said it needs contact. Living contact. You said it needs someone to sing to it. Kale crouched down next to the egg and wrapped his arms around it. The shell was rough and warm against his bare chest, but cooling. He could feel the life inside it, a faint pulse, slow and getting slower. I'm not letting this thing die. Dr. Vatha stared at him. Human, the incubation period is 19 days. You would have to maintain physical contact for 19 days, without proper sleep, while deliberately keeping your body temperature elevated. It will damage your health. Probably, Kale agreed. He began to hum. Low and steady, something his mother used to hum when he was small and sick and scared. He didn't even remember the name of the song. He just remembered the feeling of it, the safety of it, and he pressed that feeling into the egg like a promise. The pulse inside the shell stuttered. Then it steadied. Then, so faintly he almost missed it, it quickened a doctor. Vatha's translator crackled as she whispered something in her own language. Then she said, "The embryo is responding. Its heart rate has increased by 4%. She paused. That should not be possible this quickly. Babies know when someone's holding them. Kale said simply. Doesn't matter what species. Within an hour, the Galactic Union Patrol ship had cleared a medical bay for Kale and the egg. They set up thermal blankets, monitoring equipment, and a nutrition drip so Kale wouldn't have to leave the egg to eat. The ship's doctor, a tall insectoid named Chirik, objected to the entire arrangement on medical grounds and was politely ignored. Kale held the egg and he hummed. He hummed through the first night, through the second day, through the aching in his arms, and the fever he deliberately maintained by refusing to let the ship's medical system regulate his temperature. His body hurt. His muscles cramped. Sweat soaked through every blanket they put under him, but the egg was warm. And the tiny heart inside it beat stronger with every passing hour. By the third day, the news had spread across the Union communication network. A human was incubating the last Korvathi egg with his own body heat. Reactions ranged from disbelief to fascination to outright mockery. Several species sent messages suggesting that the human was either mentally ill or engaged in some elaborate publicity stunt. Kale didn't read any of them. He was too busy singing that he had moved beyond humming now. He sang old Earth songs, half-remembered lullabies, folk tunes, even advertising jingles when he ran out of everything else. The egg didn't seem to care about musical quality. It cared about presence. Every time Kale paused for more than a few minutes, the heart rate inside the shell would dip, and he would start again. On the fifth day, the egg moved. Not a crack, not a hatch, just a shift, a slight rocking, like something inside was adjusting its position to get closer to the sound of his voice. Kale pressed his forehead against the shell and whispered, "I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere." And he meant it. By the 8th day, Kale Maddox had lost 11 pounds and gained a reputation that stretched across 3-star systems. The medical bay on the Union Patrol ship Clarity of Purpose had become something between a hospital room and a shrine. Dr. Vatha visited every 4 hours to check the egg's vital signs, and every single time, she left looking stunned. The embryo was not just surviving. It was thriving. Growth markers that should have flatlined without a Korvathi mother were hitting normal ranges, and in some cases exceeding them. This defies everything we know about Korvathi biology, she told Ship Commander Olathan in the corridor outside the medical bay. Kale could hear them through the thin walls, though they probably didn't realize it. The embryo has formed a bond with the human, a genuine neurological bond. It recognizes his heartbeat, his voice patterns, even his breathing rhythm. If we removed him now, the shock alone could kill it. Then we do not remove him, Olathan said. His voice was the calm, measured tone of a palith, a species that expressed emotion through color changes in their face plates rather than vocal inflection. Kale imagined his face was probably doing something interesting right now. How long? 11 more days. And the human's condition? There was a pause. Deteriorating. Slowly, but measurably. He is running a sustained low-grade fever by choice. His muscle mass is decreasing from immobility. His sleep cycles are fragmented because the egg becomes distressed when his consciousness fades too deeply. He is, by any reasonable medical standard, torturing himself. Has he asked to stop? No. He has asked for more blankets and a music player loaded with something called country western. Kale smiled at that. He had made the request half as a joke, but Shirak had actually found an archive of Earth music in the ship's cultural database and loaded it onto a small speaker. The egg seemed to especially enjoy the songs with deep bass lines and steady rhythms. Kale had started calling it Bean because it showed up on the thermal scanner as a curled little shape that looked exactly like a kidney bean if kidney beans had 6 legs and a tail. "You're a weird little thing," Kale murmured to the egg on the 9th morning, adjusting his position on the padded floor they'd set up for him. His back screamed in protest. His arms had gone numb twice during the night, and he'd had to shake them out while keeping his torso pressed against the shell. "But I guess I'm pretty weird too, so we match." The egg rocked gently in response. That was new. Over the past 2 days, the egg had started responding to his voice with small movements. Not just shifting for comfort, but actual reactions. When Kale spoke softly, the egg would settle. When he laughed, it would rock. When he was quiet for too long, it would vibrate with a low-frequency hum of its own, as if calling to him, "Doctor." Vatha said this was impossible. She said it very firmly, while recording every instance on her medical tablet with trembling hands. On the 10th day, they received a message from the Korvathi Preservation Council. It was a short message, translated from a language that apparently had no word for hope, because the Korvathi had stopped using it generations ago. The message said simply, "Is it true?" Olathan let Kale compose the reply. He kept it short because his hands were shaking from exhaustion and it was hard to type while hugging an egg. "Yes, the egg is healthy. The baby is strong. I can feel it moving. I'll keep it safe." The response came back 14 hours later. It was even shorter. What? Kale didn't know how to answer that at first. He lay there in the dim medical bay with the egg warm against his chest and the speaker playing something slow and gentle, and he thought about it. Why? It was such a small word for such a big question. Why would a human from a planet that had driven its own species to the edge of self-destruction a dozen times overcare about the last egg of an alien reptile he'd never met? Why would he break his own body to keep something alive that wasn't his child, wasn't his species, wasn't even his problem? He typed back, because someone has to. Then he deleted it because it sounded too noble, too clean, too much like a speech. He tried again, because I was there, and it needed help, and I could give it. He sent that one. Then he put down the communicator and went back to singing. Being rocked happily against his ribs on the 12th day, Kale's fever spiked beyond his control. What had been a carefully maintained elevation of 2 degrees suddenly jumped to 4, and his body began to shake violently. Chirik rushed in with cooling patches and emergency medication, but Kale grabbed his arm with surprising strength for a man who hadn't properly slept in almost 2 weeks. "Don't cool me down too fast," he gasped. "The egg. If my temperature drops, suddenly it could. You could seize," Chirik said flatly. "You could suffer brain damage. You could die. Bring it down slow. 1/2 degree at a time. Please." Chirik looked at him with compound eyes that reflected the light in 1,000 tiny points. Then the insectoid doctor did something Kale had never seen him do before. He placed one delicate limb on Kale's shoulder, a gesture that in Chirik's culture meant something close to profound respect. 1/2 degree at a time. Chirik agreed. It took 6 hours to stabilize Kale's temperature. During those 6 hours, the egg never stopped humming. Its low vibration matched Kale's heartbeat exactly, rising when his pulse raced, slowing when it steadied, as if the tiny creature inside was trying to anchor him the same way he had been anchoring it. "It's helping him," Dr. Vatha whispered, watching the synchronized readings on her scanner. "The embryo is modulating its own bioelectric field to stabilize his autonomic responses. It's trying to keep him alive." Nobody in the room spoke for a long time. Kale, half-conscious and soaked in sweat, pressed his cheek against the egg's rough shell and mumbled, "Good kid." Bean hummed louder. 14 days into the incubation, the clarity of purpose docked at Verith Station, the largest medical facility in the sector. The news had spread far beyond what anyone on the ship had expected. What started as a small story on Union communication boards had become a sensation that crossed species boundaries and political lines that a human was keeping the last Korvathi alive with his heartbeat. The station's docking bay was crowded when the ship arrived. Not with officials or doctors, though those were there too. It was crowded with ordinary people. Dozens of species standing in clusters, holding translated signs, pressing against the security barriers to catch a glimpse of the medical bay doors. Kale didn't see any of this because he was unconscious. The fever had stabilized, but the toll on his body was mounting in other ways. Muscle wasting, dehydration that the nutrition drip could only partially address, microfractures in his ribs from holding a 60-kilogram egg against his chest for 2 weeks straight. An exhaustion so deep that his brain had started shutting down and rolling blackouts. Moments where he would simply stop functioning for 30 seconds at a time before snapping back. Through all of it, he never let go of the egg. Even unconscious, his arms stayed locked around it. Chirik had tried to shift him once for a medical scan, and Kale had growled in his sleep, an actual growl, deep and animal and nothing like the sound a civilized human was supposed to make. Chirik had backed away quickly and decided the scan could wait. Doctor Vatha had a theory about that. She shared it with the medical team at Verith Station while they debated whether to intervene. "The bond is bidirectional now," she explained, pulling up scan after scan on the display. "The human's brain is producing neurochemicals consistent with parental bonding. Oxytocin, vasopressin, prolactin, the same cocktail his species generates when caring for their own newborns. His body has decided, on a chemical level, that this egg is his child. He will not release it voluntarily, even in sleep. Possibly especially in sleep, when conscious override is removed and pure instinct takes over." The station's chief medical officer, a Dralani named Suvat, studied the scans with her single enormous eye. And the egg has matched him. Korvathi embryos normally bond to their mother's bioelectric signature in the final week of development. This one has bonded to the human instead. It knows his heartbeat, his voice, his scent profile. When it hatches, it will imprint on him as its parent. A Korvathi bonded to a human, Suvat said slowly. That has never happened in recorded history. Many things that have never happened are happening in that medical bay, Dr. Vatha replied. The decision was made to let Kale continue. They moved him and the egg to a larger room with better medical equipment and a team of specialists on standby. They adjusted his nutrition drip, treated his ribs with a bone density supplement that made him nauseous for a full day, and fitted him with a neural monitor that would alert them if his brain function dropped below safe levels. Kale woke up on day 15 and asked for water and his music player, in that order. You are in Varith Station, Chirik informed him. You have been unconscious for 11 hours. Your body is in significant distress. I strongly recommend, for more days, Kale said. His voice was a wreck, raw and cracked from singing and dehydration and sheer stubbornness. Just 4 more days. You may not have 4 more days. Bean does. That's what matters. Chirik's compound eyes flickered. You named the egg. Seemed rude not to. Outside the medical room, the crowds at Varith Station continued to grow. Live feed from the station's external cameras showed ships arriving from across the sector. The Korvathi Preservation Council sent a delegation of 3, the largest gathering of living Korvathi in decades. They were ancient creatures, scaled and scarred and enormous, each one the size of a ground transport vehicle. They sat in the station's main hall, and they waited. One of them, the eldest, asked to see the human. Security was hesitant, but Olithin approved the visit. They guided the old Korvathi through corridors that were barely wide enough for her bulk, her claws clicking on the metal floor, her breathing a slow, deep rumble that shook the walls. She stopped at the door of the medical room and looked through the viewing window. Inside, Kale lay curled around the egg on the padded floor. He was singing again, barely above a whisper, some tuneless thing that wandered between notes like it couldn't decide where to land. His skin was pale, and his arms were thin, and his face was gaunt with exhaustion. But his hands were steady on the egg's shell, and his voice never faltered. The old Korvathi watched for a long time. Her massive head tilted to one side, then the other. Her vertical pupils dilated and contracted. Then she did something that made everyone in the corridor take a step back. She began to sing that it was not a sound anyone expected from a creature that size. It was soft, unimaginably soft, a vibration more felt than heard. It resonated through the walls, through the floor, through the bones of every living thing within 50 meters. It was the sound a Korvathi mother made for her eggs, the sound that Dr. Vatha had said could not be replicated. Inside the room, the egg shuddered. Then it rocked. Then it began to hum back, a sound it had only ever made for Kale, now offered to this stranger who carried the same ancient song in her blood. Kale opened his eyes. He looked at the window. He saw the old Korvathi standing there, singing to the egg he held in his arms, and tears cut tracks down his hollow cheeks. He didn't stop singing either. For 20 minutes, a human and a Korvathi sang together through a window, and the last egg of a dying species hummed between them like a bridge. Day 17 was the day Kale's heart stopped. IT happened at what the station systems logged as 0347 local time. One moment his cardiac monitor showed a steady, tired rhythm. The next it showed a flat line. Chirik was in the room in under 40 seconds, crash kit in hand, mandibles clicking with urgency. But by the time Chirik reached him, Kale's heart had already restarted. The medical data told a story that made no biological sense. At the moment of cardiac arrest, the egg's bioelectric field had surged to levels never recorded in any Korvathi embryo. The surge had lasted exactly 1.3 seconds, the precise duration of Kale's flatline, and then both readings had returned to normal simultaneously. The egg had restarted his heart. I need everyone to understand, Dr. Vatha said to the assembled medical team an hour later, her voice carrying a quality that the translator rendered as controlled hysteria, that what I am about to say has no basis in any existing scientific literature. The embryo detected the cessation of its bonded partner's cardiac function and responded with a targeted bioelectric pulse calibrated to restart a human heart. A human heart. An organ the embryo has never seen, belonging to a species that evolved in a completely different star system. It knew what to do, and it did it in less than 2 seconds. Suvat, the station's chief medical officer, leaned back in her chair. You're saying the unhatched Korvathi performed emergency cardiac resuscitation. I'm saying the bond between them has progressed beyond anything in our models. They're not two separate organisms anymore, not functionally. They're a system. Each one is monitoring the other. Each one is keeping the other alive. This information was not shared with the public. Olathan made that decision personally, and no one argued with him. Some things were too strange, too sacred, too easy to misunderstand. Kale, for his part, seemed unsurprised when they told him. I know, he said. He was propped up against a thermal pillow now, the egg cradled in his lap. His voice had been reduced to a permanent rasp that the doctors said might never fully recover. I felt it, like a kick. Not painful, just firm. Like something grabbed my chest and said, "Not yet. You should be frightened," Chirik observed. I probably should be a lot of things. Kale ran his thumb along a ridge on the egg shell. It was a gesture he developed over the days, a small repetitive motion that seemed to soothe the embryo. But Bean brought me back. Hard to be scared of something that saved your life. Day 18 brought a different kind of crisis. The Galactic Trade Consortium, a powerful economic body that had largely ignored the Korvathi situation for decades, suddenly announced an interest in the egg. Their representative, a sleek Minari in an expensive suit, arrived at Vera Station with a legal team and a proposal. The pitch was simple. The consortium would fund a state-of-the-art habitat for the hatched Korvathi. The best food, the best medical care, the best living conditions credits could buy. In exchange, the consortium would retain breeding rights and genetic access when the Korvathi matured. The potential for bioelectric technology derived from Korvathi physiology was, the representative explained with a straight face, too valuable to leave in the hands of a single exhausted human with no resources. Olathan listened politely. The Korvathi delegation listened less politely. Their rumbling breaths made the conference room vibrate. Kale was not present for the meeting because he was in the medical bay singing something that might have been an old folk tune about a river. But when Olathan told him about the proposal afterward, Kale's reaction was immediate and absolute. No. The consortium has significant legal standing in. I said no. Bean isn't a product. Bean isn't a resource. Bean is a baby. The consortium may attempt to press the matter through union courts. Kale looked up from the egg. His eyes, sunken and ringed with dark circles, held a steadiness that seemed borrowed from somewhere deeper than his broken body should have been able to reach. Then I guess we'd better make sure Bean has a parent who can fight for them in court. What's the union's legal framework for interspecies adoption? That question landed like a grenade in the middle of the station's administrative offices. Interspecies adoption existed in union law, but it was rare, complicated, and had never been tested with a species as endangered as the Korvathi. The legal team spent the rest of the day researching, while Kale spent the rest of the day doing what he had done every day for 18 days. He held the egg. He sang. He endured. The old Korvathi, whose name was Mithra, visited him again that evening. She was too large to enter the room, so she lay in the corridor with her head near the doorway, and she sang her low, bone-deep song, while Kale sang his rough, broken human one. Between songs, she spoke to him through the translator. Her voice was ancient and slow. You are dying for this egg, human. I'm living for it, Kale corrected. There's a difference. Is there? Dying is giving up. I haven't given up. I'm just tired. Mithra considered this. Her massive tail shifted, scraping against the corridor wall. Among my people, there was a word. Kethvala. It meant the one who holds fire for another. The one who burns so that something precious can stay warm. She paused. We stopped using the word because there was nothing left worth burning for. You have given us a reason to remember it. Kale pressed his face against the egg and breathed out slowly. One more day, he whispered to Bean. One more day, and you get to see the stars. I promise. The egg hummed against his chest, and somewhere in the corridor, An ancient dragon sang a lullaby that her species had almost forgotten. Day 19 dawned, and the egg began to crack. It started with a sound. Not the dramatic splitting that the nature documentaries might have shown, but a tiny, persistent tapping from inside the shell. Top, top, top. Rhythmic and determined, like a small fist knocking on a door it fully expected to be opened. Kale felt it against his chest before the monitors picked it up. After 19 days of holding this egg, he knew every vibration, every shift, every subtle change in temperature. And this was different. This was arrival. It's time, he said, and his ruined voice somehow found enough strength to sound steady. The medical team mobilized within minutes. Dr. Vatha rushed in with scanners and incubation equipment. Chirik prepared emergency medical supplies for both Kale and the hatchling. Suvat monitored from the observation room with 3 specialists from different species, all of whom had traveled specifically for this moment. In the corridor. Mithra lifted her enormous head and went very still. The other 2 Korvathi elders, who had barely moved in days, rose to their feet with a grinding of ancient joints and scales. Olathan opened a communication channel to the station's public areas, where hundreds of beings from dozens of species had been holding vigil. He said simply, "It has begun." The tapping intensified. A hairline fracture appeared near the top of the egg, then another, then a web of tiny cracks spreading outward like a map of rivers seen from space. The shell, which had been Kale's constant companion and burden and purpose for nearly 3 weeks, began to split. The embryo's vitals are strong, Dr. Vatha reported, her voice shaking with an emotion the translator couldn't categorize. Heart rate elevated, but within normal parameters. Bioelectric field is active and stable. It's ready. Kale didn't respond. He was watching the cracks, his hands on either side of the egg, not helping, not hindering, just present. Just about a piece of shell fell away, and something moved underneath. Wet and dark and alive. Then a claw emerged. Tiny, curved, gleaming black, about the size of Kale's thumb. It scratched at the edge of the opening, widening it, and a second claw joined the first. Then a snout pushed through, blunt and scaled, with 2 nostrils that flared open and took in the first breath of outside air. The hatchling sneezed at IT with such a small, ridiculous sound that Kale laughed, and the laugh turned into a sob, and the sob turned back into a laugh because he couldn't tell the difference anymore. 19 days of pain and fever and singing and holding on, and the first thing Bean did upon entering the universe was sneeze. The rest of the shell fell away in pieces over the next several minutes. The hatchling worked methodically, pushing and clawing with 6 stubby legs that didn't quite coordinate yet. It was about the size of a large cat, covered in dark scales that glistened with fluid, with a ridge of soft spines running down its back and a tail that curled and uncurled like it was testing itself. Its eyes opened last. They were gold, bright, burning gold, with vertical pupils that contracted sharply in the medical bay's light, and they locked onto Kale. The hatchling went still. Its nostrils flared again, pulling in his scent. Its head tilted to one side, then the other, exactly like Mithra had done when she first saw him through the window. Then it opened its mouth and made a sound. Not a cry, not a screech, a hum. Low and steady and perfectly matched to the frequency Kale had been producing for 19 days. That IT recognized him, Doctor. Vatha's scanner was trembling in her hands. Full imprint confirmed. Neural bonding is complete. The hatchling has identified the human as its primary caregiver. Its stress hormones are at baseline. It is completely calm. Kale held out his hands, and Bean crawled into them. The hatchling was warm, warmer than the egg had been, and its tiny claws pricked his skin as it climbed up his arms and settled against his chest in exactly the same position the egg had occupied. It pressed its head under his chin, and its humming deepened. "Hey, Bean," Kale whispered. "Told you I'd be here." From the corridor came a sound that made the entire room vibrate. Mithra was singing, not the soft lullaby she had offered before. This was something bigger, something that resonated in the walls and the floor and the chest of every living being within range. The other 2 Korvathi elders joined her, and the three ancient voices wove together into a harmony that had not been heard in decades. That it was a birth song. A welcome. Bean lifted its head from Kale's chest and turned toward the sound. Its golden eyes widened. Then, in a voice impossibly small for a creature that would one day grow to the size of a building, it sang back. The translator could not process what happened next because the sounds moved below and above the range of most species' hearing. But Kale felt it, a resonance that passed through Bean's body and into his own, a vibration that settled somewhere behind his sternum and stayed there like a second heartbeat. The hatchling is communicating, Dr. Vatha whispered. It's using Korvathi natal frequencies. It should know those. It was never exposed to a Korvathi mother song during the critical development window. It was exposed to Mithra's singing, Chirik pointed out, for 20 minutes, through a wall. That is not sufficient for... Dr. Vatha stopped. She looked at Kale. She looked at Bean, the human. He heard Mithra's song. He internalized the frequencies. And through the bond, the embryo received them from him. I'm a radio, Kale said flatly. You are a bridge, Dr. Vatha corrected. You carried a dying species' song in your bones and gave it to their child. Kale looked down at Bean, who had stopped singing and was now trying to eat his collar. Its tiny teeth were already sharp. Could we maybe save the poetic analysis for after I've slept for the first time in 3 weeks? They gave him a bed. A real bed with actual sheets and a pillow that didn't smell like sweat and thermal blankets. Bean refused to leave his chest, and nobody tried to make it. The hatchling curled up in the hollow of Kale's throat, its tail wrapped around his arm, its humming fading to a gentle purr. Kale was asleep in seconds. For the first time in 19 days, his heart rate dropped to a normal resting rhythm. His fever broke completely, and his brain slipped into deep, genuine, restorative sleep. Bean slept too, rising and falling with each of his breaths. 3 months later, Kale Maddox sat in Union courtroom and listened to a lawyer explain why he shouldn't be allowed to keep his child. The Galactic Trade Consortium had made good on their legal threat. Their case was built on 3 arguments. First, that a human was biologically incompatible with Korvathi rearing. Second, that the species' survival was too important to leave to an individual with no training in xenobiology. Third, that Kale's continued custody posed a risk to the hatchling's cultural development, as it would grow up without exposure to its own kind. The courtroom was enormous, designed to accommodate species of all sizes. Kale sat at a small table near the front with a public defender who looked terrified and a translator earpiece that kept buzzing. Bean sat on the table next to him, now the size of a medium dog, scales darkened to a deep blue-black, gold eyes scanning the room with alert curiosity. The hatchling's tail was wrapped around Kale's wrist. It had done that every time it sensed he was stressed since approximately day 3 of its life. The consortium's lawyer was a Minari, the same species as the representative who had visited Verith Station. Tall, polished, speaking in precise legal language that the translator rendered in clipped, confident tones. The Korvathi species cannot afford sentiment, the lawyer argued. This hatchling represents a genetic legacy of incalculable value. Its development must be guided by experts, not by a single human with no qualifications beyond stubbornness. Kale's public defender stood to respond, but was interrupted by a sound from the back of the courtroom. A deep, resonant rumble that made the furniture vibrate and the water glasses on every table ripple in perfect concentric circles. Mithra entered the courtroom. She was too large for the main door, so the building's engineering team had removed an entire wall panel to allow her access. She moved slowly, deliberately, her ancient body filling half the gallery space. The other 2 Korvathi elders followed her, and together the 3 of them represented more combined mass than everything else in the room. Mithra settled herself with a grinding of scales against floor and looked at the judge, a Paleth whose faceplates were cycling through colors so rapidly it was clearly involuntary. I wish to speak, Mithra said. The judge granted permission. There was, realistically, no other option. That Mithra's voice filled the courtroom like weather. I am the eldest living Korvathi. I have seen our species diminish from millions to dozens to three. I have watched our eggs stolen, our nests burned, our songs forgotten. I have lived long enough to hear silence where there should be voices. The room was absolutely still. This human came to us with nothing but his body and his will. He held our last hope against his chest for 19 days and burned himself to keep it warm. He carried our songs in his bones when he did not know what they were. He gave our child its first breath, its first voice, its first safety. She turned her massive head toward the consortium's table. You speak of qualifications. What qualification did this human present when he wrapped himself around a dying egg in the rubble of a destroyed facility? What credential did he offer when his heart stopped and the child he was saving restarted it? What expertise did he demonstrate when he sang our birth songs back to us through a wall? Her tail struck the floor once. The impact cracked a floor tile. He qualified himself with everything he is, and you dare to call it stubbornness. The consortium's lawyer attempted to redirect. With respect, the emotional narrative does not change the biological reality. Humans cannot. I was there, Mithra said, and her voice dropped to a frequency that made Kale's teeth ache. I watched through a window as a creature 1/10 my size did what I could not. I am the last mother of my kind, and I could not save that egg. He could. He did. And you will not take that child from its father. The word father landed in the room and stayed there. Bean, who had been quietly observing the proceedings with the focused attention of a creature far more intelligent than its age suggested, lifted its head and sang. One clear, sustained note that resonated with Mithra's voice and filled the courtroom with a harmony that had not existed 3 months ago. A harmony that was part Korvathi and part human, something entirely new. The judge called a recess. During the recess, something happened that was not part of any legal proceeding. The 3 Korvathi elders approached Kale's table. Mithra lowered her head until her eye was level with his. Kethvala, she said, the one who holds fire. Then she said something else in untranslated Korvathi, and Bean responded instantly with a complex series of tones and hums. What did she say? Kale asked Dr. Vatha, who was sitting in the gallery as an expert witness. Doctor. Vatha's translator crackled with something that sounded like a laugh and a sob combined. She told Bean to remember its father's song, and Bean replied that it never forgot. The court ruled in Kale's favor. The decision was not close. The judge cited the biological evidence of the bond, the testimony of the Korvathi elders, and a legal precedent that Kale's defender had somehow found at 3 in the morning involving a human who had adopted an orphan Drellani 400 years earlier. The consortium appealed. The appeal was denied the same day, which was nearly unprecedented in Union legal history and suggested that someone very high up had made a phone call. Kale walked out of the courtroom with Bean on his shoulder. The hatchling's tail was still wrapped around his wrist, and it was humming softly, the same low, steady sound it had made from inside the egg when it first heard his voice. Outside, a crowd had gathered. Hundreds of beings from dozens of species, many holding signs, some singing, some simply standing in witness. Kale stopped on the courthouse steps and looked out at them. This strange, vast, impossible gathering of people who cared about one man and one small dragon. Bean raised its head and sang to them. A birth song, a welcome. The same song Mithra had taught through a wall and Kale had carried in his bones, 3 months old, and Bean was already building bridges. Kale sat down on the steps because his legs were still not fully recovered, and Bean climbed into his lap and pressed its head under his chin, right where it had always fit, right where it had always belonged. So, Kale said quietly, I guess we're family now. Bean hummed in agreement. Somewhere in the crowd, an old dragon sang, and the universe, for one small moment, felt like it might actually be kind.